Hello, my name is Stephen Cahill, and I'm a professor of biology at West Kentucky Community and Technical College. And this is part of a continuing series on how to manage stress during the COVID pandemic. The title of this particular installment is What is Stress? So I want to start this video by saying stress management and the things that are found in these videos are not going to be helpful if you have clinical depression, thoughts of suicide, anxiety disorders, or sleep disorders. Instead, I offer for you the web link here for current students and counseling services that are provided through our West Kentucky Community and Technical College. So let's go ahead and take a look at stress, and I'll see if I can define stress. Stress is a noun, and it is defined by Google as a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. And the part I've highlighted there, resulting from adverse and very demanding circumstances, is the definition of another word called a stressor. So a stressor is something that causes a state of strain or tension. So you can see when we go to define what stress is, we get a new vocabulary word, stressor. And then when we try to define stressor, we go right back to our original definition of stress. This is called a tautology, and it kind of circles back on itself. So it's really difficult to define what stress is. So one of the founders of stress biology is a man named Hans Selye, and he said stress, in addition to itself, is also the cause of itself and the result of itself. So I've changed this definition, and I say stress makes me stressed, which causes more stress, right? The snowball effect. A stressor, something in our life that causes stress, can produce stress, and then that feeling in and of itself can produce more stress. We call this a positive feedback loop, a snowball effect. Stress is actually something new to our vocabulary. If we were to say stress before Walter Cannon in 1915, this would probably mean stress on materials, stress on a bridge, stress on a piece of wood as you bent on that piece of wood. But Walter Cannon described the fight or flight response. And I think a lot of this is familiar to us. We've seen the fight or flight response, have been taught about it in classes before. We'll look a little bit more here in a second about our fight or flight response. Another founder of stress biology is Hans Selye, and he described what was called the general adaptation syndrome. And so what he said was that stressors upon animals produce relatively the same consequences, physiological changes, or symptoms in these different animals. Hans also said that there were two different kinds of stress, eustress and distress. So eustress is good type of stress that's beneficial, and distress is a bad type of stress, harmful to us. Stress overall is good. We're going to learn today that stress is adaptive. We need stress. It can motivate us to do the things that we need to do. The learning that comes from stressful situations can help us to avoid those situations or do better the next time we encounter them. I come across the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that's what I think when I think about stress and what we learn from stress. So let's take a look at a balance of stress. Eustress is someplace in the middle between too much stress and not enough stress. This is where we want to be, right here in this eustress territory. You can't get rid of stress. It's always going to be a part of your life. Stressors will be a part of your life, and it will cause stress. But we want to have that balance. We don't want to have so much stress that we're like deer caught in headlights. We don't want so much stress that we procrastinate and do nothing at all. On the other end of the spectrum, we don't want so little stress as to be risk takers unnecessarily, or to have no ambition whatsoever, no motivating drive. So here's where we want to be. Stress that's healthful, stress that's helpful. Different stressors have the potential to produce these similar effects. This is what Hans Selye had told us. So whether it be something like a violent assault, prolonged exposure to things like hot or cold, starvation, overcrowding, a car coming into your lane, upcoming exams, or even being late for work, all of these very different stressors can have that same general adaptation syndrome, the same response of our body, the same symptom. Here we have 3 different animals under 3 different stressors, but their bodies are reacting in very similar ways. The lioness is under the stress of starvation. The wildebeest is under the stress of being eaten. And here it looks like this student is under the stress of waiting too long to study for their test. So this fight or flight syndrome has changes that occur on our body. And one way to think about this fight or flight response is allocating resources of our body to the things that need them the most. So we have a limited number of resources, and so we are going to devote those resources to the parts of the body that need them most, whether they be oxygen or nutrients. We will devote those things to the places that need them most. So when we are under a fight or flight response, our brain is going to be more attuned to the direct cause of that stress. We'll have tunnel vision. We will focus very deeply on what we are encountering, and we'll make very vivid memories of what's occurring. Our eyes will have their pupils dilate, and we'll be better able to fix on what's right in front of us, literally right in front of us, as well as metaphorically. Our salivary glands will stop to produce saliva, and this is one of the reasons why when you see people public speaking, they'll have a glass of water next to them. Perhaps they're nervous, their fight or flight responses lower the amount of saliva that they have, so they have to take a drink of water to get their mouth from being too dry. And this is a way of allocating this precious resource of saliva to other things. The depth and rate of our breathing will increase. We're going to need more oxygen going to our working muscles in this fight or flight response. And so we'll bring in more air, and we'll have more respiratory cycles, breathing more quickly. The force of our heart is going to increase, and the rate of the heart's beating is going to go up. Speed and force of the heart pounding away in our chest under a fight or flight response. We're going to take away some of the blood flow to our digestive system, and digestion will all but stop, whereas blood flow is going to be increased to working muscles. And all of these different things are helpful. They are adaptive. They are getting us ready to conquer this challenge. Let's take a look at a relatively large study from 2012. 186 million US adults were surveyed on how they viewed stress and the amount of stress that they had. So all the participants were asked, how much stress do you have you had in the last year? And of the participants who said a lot, they were also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful to your health? When participants said they had a lot of stress, but it did not affect their health was not affected. They did not die of premature death over those 8 years. Contrary to that, when other people were asked if they had a lot of stress, but also said that it did affect a person's health. In this case, they had a 43% increase in chance of premature death. So simply our attitude towards stress, our belief as to whether or not it harms us, can affect whether or not in fact it does harm our health. Is there anything that we can do to change that? In another study called Mind Over Matter, Reappraising Arousal Improves Cardiovascular Health, they showed that we can do just that. They took 50 participants and they put them into a stressful situation. While they were stressing their patients out, they did a measurement called total peripheral resistance, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Total peripheral resistance. So 25 of these adults were taught beforehand that their stress response was adaptive, that it was helpful and it was useful to their survival, and a feature that would help them through any stressful situation. When their fight or flight response was measured, they had a lower total peripheral resistance. Okay. They took 25 other adults and gave them no instructions beforehand. They didn't tell them that fight or flight response was helpful or adaptive. They didn't give them any information on it whatsoever. And at the end, they found that their total peripheral resistance was higher. Okay, so what does this mean? If we think of total peripheral resistance as the workload that's put on your heart, so here it is. This is total peripheral resistance right here. This workload, and this is your heart pushing blood through your circulatory system. If total peripheral resistance goes up, well then your heart has to work harder and you can have an increase in blood pressure. Well, an increase of blood pressure is associated with cardiovascular health or cardiovascular disease. Greater amounts of blood pressure over longer periods of time can equate to poor cardiovascular health. So you'll remember the 25 adults that were taught that their stress response was adaptive and helpful, they had this lower total peripheral resistance. Lower resistance on their heart, could effectively lower their blood pressure and help their cardiovascular health. In fact, the type of stress response that these people had was more like the elation of somebody in sports competition. So that feeling, that fight or flight response that comes with conquering, winning, and becoming a champion, that same physiological response is the physiological response that was had by these people that were trained. The fight or flight response is helpful. The blood flowing to your brain is helping you to think better. The blood flowing to your muscles is better helping you to fight or fly from this situation. A third study that I would like to talk about is entitled Giving to Others and the Association Between Stress and Mortality. So one of the hormones that's released during childbirth is called oxytocin. It's also released during breastfeeding. It's released during times when we pair bond. And so it's got the nickname the love hormone. Pair bonding is associated with this oxytocin, but it's also released during stress. And so if we go and seek the help of others when we're under stressful conditions, or if we help others during their stressful times, both of these things are associated with better stress response and better health outcomes. These are the studies that I cited. And as we go through this series of videos, I want us to say to ourselves, can we get rid of stress? No, we can't. Can we handle stress? Yes. And the videos will be different ways and techniques that we can overcome, manage our stress. And I thank you.